So we're going to move into the 144 wiring harness install. So our finished product is going to be this little metal plate on the driver's side lower section of the wall right behind the wheel well. This is where everything, all of our fuses and everything are going to be housed within the wall panel for easy access. In your electrical kit, you're going to have a small box that's going to be your first step in your install process. This is going to contain a few components. One is going to be a black negative ground connection wire. One is going to be a short red positive connection wire. And then you're also going to have a small switch with a fuse included. We'll move into later the more specifics on how these all get installed. Your second box is going to be the wires that we're actually going to run under the van. So this is what's going to pull power from that seat base all the way back to that fuse block behind the wheel well. Your third box is going to be your fuse block and all of your fuses, all the components to make the connections from your actual wiring harnesses that runs power to all your components to your fuse block. Your fourth box is going to be all of your end connections. So this is all going to be done after the wiring harness is installed and hooked up to the fuse blocks. This will be your very last step. Your main wiring looms are going to be in the actual wiring harness box. You're going to have 4. The white and the blue are going to run to your passenger side connections, and then the black and the orange are going to be your driver's side connections. So the first and most important step of our wiring harness install is to disconnect the main ground for your van. This is going to cut power to all of the electrical connections that we're going to be messing with under the seat. So this will make sure that you're operating safely and also make sure that you're not throwing any codes or creating issues with the electrical of the van. This connection is housed under the driver's seat right up next to the gas pedal. There's a little cover that you can pop off and then disconnect it using that red button on the top of the ground post. Once you have that ground disconnected, we're going to want to remove our driver's seat. There's 4 bolts, 1 in each corner. You might have to move the emergency brake if you have one, or get a different socket size depending on which connection you're undoing, just because the seat can kind of be in the way. A good tip is if your seats are on swivels, you can move the seat out of your way and make it a little easier for yourself. Once you have your bolts removed, you're going to want to disconnect the 2 wires from under your seat that connect to the main wiring harness in that seat base. This will allow you to remove the seat safely. So you can see here we've got them disconnected. They just have some little factory clips that hold them in. And then you want to set those to the side and remove this little like padded cover that's over all of the connections under the seat base. Once you have full access to the seat base, we're going to want to move this like connection bar out of our way. So there's just a screw in each side that you can undo and shift that. We usually shift it towards the back of the van, just kind of up and out of the way to give us access to the connections underneath. I like to always put my hardware back in the holes that they came from so that I know exactly where they are and I don't lose them. Otherwise, you can just keep a little cup on hand to keep all of your hardware safe and in one spot. We're going to move on to removing the little 12-volt outlet on the passenger side of the seat base. We're going to replace this with a switch. So there's a couple plastic tabs on the back side of that outlet that need to be engaged to remove it. This can be a little tricky. We're not going to be reusing this outlet, so if you do end up like causing damage to it, don't worry about it too much. Once you have it removed, we're going to open up that hole a little bit. You just need to open it up by like 1/8 of an inch or so to allow our switch to go and fit into that hole. You're going to want to use a large step bit to make this hole. Once you've test fit your switch, you can go ahead and deburr the hole and rust prevent. We want to make sure to treat that exposed metal to make sure you don't have any rust form down the line. So the first thing we're going to show is the connection, and this to an auxiliary battery. So this is only if you have a factory auxiliary battery. If you don't, you can skip past this part to the section where we're going to connect to the main starter battery. But if you have an auxiliary battery, you're going to have a little housing for a bus bar underneath your driver's seat base, which we show here. So you can pop that out of place, and then there should just be some plastic retaining clips for the cover on that. And you can pop that off, and then you can see here there's a connection on the far right side. And there's usually a factory fuse already, but there will also be an 80 amp fuse in your electrical kit that you can use. So you're going to connect that to that far right post, and then using the cable that comes in your battery connection box, there's a 4-gauge cable labeled battery terminal on one end and then seat base switch on the other. So you're going to connect the battery terminal end to the other end of that 80 amp fuse and then tighten down your nut. After you've done that, you can reconnect the cover to that bus bar, and then position it back into place in the seat base where you found it. After that connection's complete, you're going to take the other end and route it to kind of the forward right-hand side of your driver's seat base, and we'll connect that to the switch a little later on. If you don't have a factory auxiliary battery, we've provided all the parts to connect to your main starter battery for the van. Note that this is not approved by Mercedes, but it is the only way to hook up to your main van power to power the rest of your kit. So to do this, we're going to go underneath your driver's seat footwell and remove that rubber cover first to gain access to the battery. Once you've done that, you're going to want to remove 4 bolts for the cover plate and make sure to put those in a safe place. I like to put them back into the holes that they came from so that I don't lose track of them. But once you've done that, the battery will be exposed, and there's a little housing on the positive side of the battery. You can see here we kind of pop it out of place. This is going to be another protection from Mercedes. So this has a cutoff from the factory so that you don't drain your battery all the way down connecting anything to it. You still want to be really cognizant of not using too much power because it will drain it pretty low, but it will cut off power to your kit before your main battery is totally dead. So once you've located that kind of housing, you can disconnect it from the main battery and pull it out. You're going to use that same cable that you would have used if you had an auxiliary battery and that 80 amp fuse as well. We've put it onto a bench here so it's a little bit easier to see. Once you've removed the plastic housing from the main battery, we're going to install a shunt, which is basically going to allow us to transfer power off of that main bus bar to another post. The shunt is going to come in your battery connection kit from Adventure Wagon, and so there'll be 2 holes in that. So the sizing of the hole will determine which orientation it goes, and it's going to be right next to a 125 amp MIDI fuse from Mercedes. So once you have your shunt in place, you want to tighten down the nut on the main bus bar and then connect the 80 amp fuse to the other side, which is going to connect power from the shunt to our cable. After you have the 80 amp fuse in place, you want to connect the battery terminal side of your 4-gauge cable from your electrical kit to the other side of that 80 amp fuse. And there will be a little spot in the plastic housing that kind of routes where that wire will be. So that's a good kind of tell that you've got everything in the right spot. After you have everything connected, you want to tighten down all of your nuts and make sure those are nice and secure. And then we can reinstall this housing back onto the positive terminal of your battery. Once you've fed your cable underneath the seat base to that forward right corner, it's going to connect to the switch that we drilled the hole for previously. After you have the battery all reconnected, you can put it back on the cover plate. So to install that switch, there's a little plastic collar on the back side. So you feed the switch in from the outside and then thread that collar onto the back to secure it to the sheet metal. It doesn't matter which post you connect your cable to. One cable is going to be the one from our main battery that we just connected and fed underneath. And then the other cable you see us connecting is coming from the back of the van, which will actually run under the van up through the grommet in the bottom of the seat base in the next step. You don't have to tighten this down all the way yet either. Having it a little bit loose and allowing yourself some wiggle room in terms of the wire placement is kind of nice once you've got it installed. And then we can tighten it up all the way once everything's in there and connected. After we've got our switch connected and installed, we're going to move to the back of the van to run our wire. That's going to be our positive connection from that switch back to our fuse block. In order to do this, we actually need to drill a hole through the bottom of the van. So inside the driver's side bay, right like just forward of your driver's side wheel well, there's a little bump in the sheet metal. We're going to use a hole saw to drill a 1 3/8 hole. This hole is going to allow us to pass our wires from inside the van out under the van, and then we can run them under the van and out of the way back up into the seat base. As you can see here, we've got our hole drilled. You're going to want to clear out all those metal shavings and deburr and rust prevent that hole that you made before inserting the little plastic plug that's going to protect the wires from that raw edge. When you've passed your wires through that grommet inside the van, you can move outside the van, and underneath there's going to be a plastic cap that we're actually going to pop out. We'll end up modifying this in a minute, but after you've popped the cap out, you're going to feed enough of the red positive wire all the way forward to underneath your driver's seat base. So when you get under the van, you'll see this rubber boot with a zip tie around it, capturing all of the wires that are coming out of that seat base. So we're just going to want to clip that zip tie so that we can see up through into the seat base, so we can pass our wires easily up to that switch where we need them to be. We're going to move to modifying the little plastic cap we removed from under the van. To do this, we need a drill and a step bit, and then a Sharpie helps to kind of mark our placement of where our holes are going to be drilled. Basically, you're going to mark two X's or dots on your cap where you're going to drill, kind of evenly spaced on that plastic piece. And then we're going to drill it out to roughly 3/4 of an inch. You want it to be the same size as the plastic corrugation that's provided in your electrical kit. You want it to be able to feed through, but also be a snug fit. You don't want it to be kind of falling out. That kind of helps just keep any debris or water from getting in as much as possible. Once you have a good fit, you can use your corrugation to test fit and adjust as needed. We can move back under the van and work on feeding the cables through the corrugated plastic. After you have all of the plastic covering your positive and negative wires, you can feed the ends right back into that plastic cap and then pop the plastic cap into place. You might need to use a little bit of pressure. You just want to make sure it's nice and secure back in that factory hole that it came from. Our positive wire is the only wire that's going to actually come up through the boot, and that's going to connect to the other post on that switch. For the ground post, you're going to want to locate the post with some small wires coming off of it. This is going to be your ground, so it's going to have some wires that are already grounded from the factory to it. In this van, it was kind of up under the gas tank, so we're going to want to remove that nut, and then we're going to want to connect our ground post. After you have all of your wires run and your positive lead connected, you want to go back under the van and secure your wire to the chassis. So this will just keep it safe, keep it from rattling around or catching on anything. You can use the little factory holes in the Christmas tree zip ties in that second box to connect it along the van body. Again, you just want to make sure it's nice and tight to the sheet metal, but you do want to wait till the very end to do this, because if you have to pull any slack in either direction, having it like zip tied and secured can make that difficult. After you have your leads all secured under the van, we're going to move back into the van. So the other end of those positive and negative leads coming up through that drilled hole, we're going to go ahead and tape them together to make passing them through the van a little easier. And they're going to go up into that lower horizontal rib and up and over the wheel well. They're going to pop out in that kind of triangular bay on the aft side of the wheel well. Next, we're going to grab our white and our blue harnesses from our main wiring kit. These are going to be your passenger side leads. So in order to get these down to that same bay behind the wheel well, it's easiest to pass those larger chunks down from the top. So we're going to pass it up and over our wire chase. And then there's a little relief hole in that D-pillar. So right behind that S2 piece, you'll find a little hole. I find it easier to do one at a time, but do whatever works best for you. And then we're going to feed it all the way down through that vertical rib and then up and over and into that same kind of triangular bay. And then the other end of the harnesses are going to pass over the ceiling. So we're going to grab the blue one first and pass it up over that ceiling rib. Eventually we're going to tuck these kind of right up against that D pillar to keep any issues from happening with our panels later on. But for now, keeping it pretty loose is totally fine. So the first kind of break in that wiring harness is going to be for our aft outlets on the passenger side. So we're going to pass those again up and over the wire chase and then down through that vertical rib into the lower bay of that passenger side. The next break is going to be for your auxiliary lead. So this is just going to live in your upper bay, kind of right behind the slider door. We're going to move on to the white loom. So this is going to pass through that vertical rib just like our blue harness did, out to that kind of triangle bay behind the wheel well. And then you're going to have a few leads on this white wire, but we are going to need to pass it under the ceiling bracers, just like the blue harness. The first one's going to be your fan. That's right at the back of the van there, so you can kind of just tuck it up under one of the ceiling bracers for now. And then we're going to run the rest along that wire chase on the passenger side. You're going to drop one down to that lower bay in front of the passenger side wheel well. This is going to be for your outlets. And then we're going to run the longer one all the way over the slider door and then up over that B-pillar and down. This is going to be for your heater if you have one. If you don't have a heater, you can just leave the end capped and tuck it under your passenger seat base if you ever add one down the line. We're going to move on to our driver's side harnesses. This is going to be your black and your orange harness. So the orange, you can see, terminates in the forward section of that driver's side there. Those are going to be your outlets on either side. So you're going to have a forward outlet set and an aft outlet set. Both of those are going to drop down through that C-pillar. You're going to want to make sure that it's on the forward side of the C-pillar. So as you can see here, we passed up and over. You can't pass through that C-pillar in the van, so we do have to run it. The black harness is going to follow a similar route that the orange one does. So it goes from our fuse block location and passes through that lower bay and then up and over our C-pillar. This black harness is going to be for our lights and fan. So your lights are going to split on either side of that zero line or that center ceiling rib. And then our forward lead of that harness is going to pop out in the second ceiling bay for our fan. In your wiring kit, you're going to have a triangle-shaped steel plate. So we're going to grab this, and then the two terminal connections, you're going to have a red and a black. So we're going to bolt these on to our steel plate. You want to make sure that the post is coming out the back of that panel. So basically it's going to be facing into the wall of the van. And you're going to have all the bolts and nuts necessary in your box number 3 to mount these. We put the red post on the bottom and the black on the top. And then you just want to make sure that these are nice and secure. This is where we're going to connect our main power from our positive and negative leads from the seat base, as well as the connection from these posts to our fuse block. In our box number 3, you're also going to have your fuse block. We have a preset positioning that we like to use for our different wires. So you're going to have a label in your box with those positions. If you want to switch up your positions, you're more than welcome to, but it might cause some kind of tangling with the wires, and you'll want to relabel the front of your fuse block. So our USBs are all going to have 15 amp fuses, and then your lights are going to have 5 amp fuses, and then your fans are going to have 10. So we go ahead and pop all of these in their respective locations in our fuse block, and then it'll be a little bit easier to tell where all of our connections need to be made when we're in the van. If you're confused about positioning of any of the wires or fuses, you can go ahead and follow along for the blade fuse placement in this scene, as well as the connections in the next. Again, if you want to switch up the placement, you totally can. You just want to make sure that your fuse sizes are going to match the correct lead that's connecting into the fuse block. After your fuse block is all set up, we're going to move back into the van, and so we're going to start with our black wiring loom. You're going to see here that there's an auxiliary set of wires, a red and a black, that go kind of in the opposite direction. You can disregard these for now. They'll be used for auxiliary connections later on if needed. But on the other end of the loom where everything terminates, we're going to go ahead and take off any little caps that are on there to make the wires fully available, and then clip off the sheathing on the end of each wire. You're going to want about 1/4 inch here, just enough to expose the wire so that we can put it into our blade connections to hook into the fuse block. You're going to have 2 bags of terminal connections. One is for the 12 gauge wires and one is for the 14. Each lead is labeled with what it's for, and then also the fuse size and the wire size. You're going to want to check that before crimping on your terminals. Depending on your wire crimper, it should say what size each crimp section is used for, so what gauge of wire. You want to make sure after you've made your crimp that it's nice and secure, that the terminal can't be pulled off. Once it's connected, you're going to want to heat shrink the little sheathing on the end of the terminal connection to once again just secure it to the wire and make sure that everything's nice and watertight. You're going to go ahead and repeat this process for all of the leads on each of those 4 wiring harnesses. Once all of your terminal connections are heat shrunk, we can go ahead and connect them to our fuse block because we pre-placed our fuses. That gives us an idea too of where everything's going to go. To connect the terminal connections, you basically just loosen the little screw in each post. You can loosen it quite a bit, and you're going to want to slip that little blade terminal underneath. There's like a lock washer underneath the screw head, and then tighten it back down. I like to keep my positive